Good morning. Well, we got here. It's been a bit of a ride over the last couple of days, but we got here. I'm Andrew Bell here in Canberra. You're there all over Australia. And welcome to the Future Drought Fund Science to Practice Forum. Over the next 3 days, we're going to be hearing experiences, hearing ideas, having conversations, and sharing a way forward. I'll have a little bit of housekeeping for you in just a moment. We'll also be hearing some messages of welcome, but the first message of welcome is, as it should always be, a welcome to country.
Thanks to the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment for asking me to give this welcome to country. My name's Warren Daley. I'm one of the Ngunnawal elders from the Wallabalua tribe. Firstly, I acknowledge my elders, those past, present and emerging, and I thank them for their continuing contributions they have made to life in this city and region. For some of you, this may be your first welcome to country, and the Ngunnawal people have been custodians of Canberra for over 60,000 years. Our elders have passed down this tradition to us. Before entering another person's country, you'd always announce your arrival and not enter until asked to do so by an elder or traditional owner. As in the white man's world, you would not want your neighbour or total stranger entering your home or yard without first asking permission to do so. The reason for this practice is to protect your spirit while you're in Ngunnawal country, but to also show respect to the people and the country you're entering. For those of you that have travelled, have a safe and enjoyable journey back to your loved ones, and in ending, Ngana Yarabi Iyengu, you are all welcome to leave your footprints on the land of the Ngunnawal people. Yamalandi, welcome.
And that was Warren Daley. Yamalundi, welcome from Canberra. And we also acknowledge elders past, present and emerging on all the lands on which we meet. And some of us are meeting on lands which we weren't expected to be standing on only a couple of days ago. It's been quite the journey, and it's a big job we've got in front of us. And we're going to approach it in a way that is very much Australia all over. If we can look at a map of the country, we can see where just some of you are meeting at the moment. There you see where our hubs are situated, starting in the top end, going through tropical North Queensland, down the east coast, every state and territory covered on that map by the ACT, which is where we join you now. So let's look forward to working together. Now let's get on to housekeeping, and we first talk about we're meeting in a way that we couldn't have possibly imagined even a decade or so ago. It's on a platform which I hope you're more familiar with than you were perhaps a few days ago, called Hopin. And we have some guides there. The top tip when you're taking part and on your computer, wear a set of headphones. It'll be much better all around for everybody. If you're watching from an audience, and we still have hubs with people there around the country, make sure you're also logged in on the dedicated online platform. We recommend using Google Chrome, log into Hopin, go to hopin.com/user/sign_in, follow the prompts, click on Science to Practice Forum, Building the Foundations of Drought Resilience. That's where you enter, and then go all the way through. And that will open up the wonderful world of Hopin, where you will see various things you can click on and write in. One of them is the chat function. You can type into that box, and some of you have already been typing in there to share your thoughts, say where you're coming from, where you are. We'd love to see that. And this is a place to speak to other people attending this event. We will have Q&A sessions throughout the 3 days. I'll be facilitating all of those now. We're doing that this way because of the pressures we're under because of COVID-19 and changed arrangements hither and yon. So the way to ask a question is to go to the Q&A section, and you can ask your question of speakers and event organisers, and be very aware that although we won't be able to answer every single question, presuming there's going to be a whole load of them, but we will take note of them. It will form very much an overview of how this forum has moved over the 3 days. It's going to be a movable feast. We're all living in times many of us, if not all of us, have never known before, of impermanence. So bear with us during the coming few days. It may be a little rocky as we negotiate the technology, but we are here, as I said. Let's hope for a great 3 days. Now let's get underway, and we're going to go 1,000 kilometres to our north from here in Canberra, to just over the Queensland-New South Wales border into Queensland, up to Brent Finlay, who's the chairman of the Future Drought Fund Consultative Committee. And there is Brent. Good morning to you. Brent, you have some opening remarks for us.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning to everybody around Australia. It's yes, it is a unique forum, and a moving feast is a good way to say it. Many would have expected to be seeing the minister here at the moment, but due to COVID restrictions, unfortunately, the minister hasn't been able to get into a studio to actually make this welcome. So I know he wanted to be here. I speak to him regularly about, obviously, the Future Drought Fund, but also about the research and adoption hubs and the Science to Practice Forum today. He would have really liked to have been part of it and been able to talk to you and give you the message directly. He's excited about this opportunity that sits in front of Australian agriculture, rural and regional Australia. I'm coming, as Andrew said, from my farm. I'm actually in the Minister's electorate. I live in the Minister's electorate near Warwick, Stanthorpe and Inglewood in southern Queensland. This Science to Practice Forum the next couple of days it's exciting for the whole of the Future Drought Fund, but for all the participants right around the country, particularly the 8 hubs that have been identified, to the lead universities and to all your partners. Thank you for putting yourselves forward, putting your organisations forward to actually lead this building of resilience through our farming production systems, through the landscapes in which we farm, and really importantly, to help the communities in which our farmers live. I know of no farmer who doesn't want to live in a strong, vibrant community. The communities are what supports us when the going gets tough, particularly when drought affects us. This is part of the Future Drought Fund, and you get to hear from me shortly a bit more about that. It's a $5 billion fund. $100 million a year is spent building drought resilience. It comes through many different programs, of which the Research and Adoption Hubs are one really important program. Thank you to the hubs, as I said, and to all your partners, the RDCs, the community groups, the Indigenous groups that are part of that, the NRM groups, the farmer groups, the farmer organisations that are in some cases in a number of different groups. We thank you for putting yourselves forward to work together. A unique opportunity that's been given to rural and regional Australia. It's up to us now, all of us, to make the best of that, to how we can actually build resilience in times of drought. This is about the future. It's not about now. It's about building this resilience for the future and how we can do it. In my discussions regularly with the Minister, he talks a lot about the farmers and how the farmers are going to benefit, where they're going to see this research and how it's, the adoption, the extension, and also the commercialisation of research, how it hits the ground through all our different farming systems and our landscapes. So we'll all be excited to travel around Australia visiting each hub, and I've been to Toowoomba, to the USQ hub, my local hub, I guess, but looking forward to certainly taking the committee, the hubs committee, but also the steering committee for the Future Drought Fund extensively around this country, looking at what you're doing, how we can support you. We're certainly looking forward to that. One of the things I just close on is the collaboration that I'm seeing and I'm hearing about across Australian agriculture is wonderful. I've been in agri-politics for a number of years, and we've always talked about the things that divide us, not the things that unite us. This fund gives us the opportunity to come together, to collaborate, to actually do something that will have a lasting legacy. It is about the future. And just closing, my key focus has always been on the communities, but it's also our young farmers, our next generation who are coming in. Wouldn't it be wonderful that the next generation of scientists comes through these hubs? These hubs are not only outstanding nationally, but they've also become outstanding internationally. So with that, I'll close. Again, apologies from the Minister. He is certainly engaged and disappointed he can't be here today.
Thanks very much, Brent. Isn't it amazing? In the olden days of television, people used to watch in their living rooms and see the country and the world. We now go to other people's living rooms. It's fantastic. And stick around, Brent, because you're coming along in a couple of minutes' time to do to start us off with our keynote session. But stick tight there. Thanks very much indeed. Well, after Brent's opening remarks, let us go to the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, who've been very much instrumental in organising this event. Andrew Metcalfe is the Secretary of the Department, and he has a message at the beginning of this forum.
Hello to those joining us on your devices and computers, and also everyone who's joined the forum at our Drought Resilience Hub viewing locations across the country, including in Darwin, in Cairns, in Toowoomba, my old hometown, in Wagga, in Hobart and Adelaide, in places like Merredin, Western Australia, and indeed here in Canberra, and indeed other locations right around Australia. Whether you work on the land, in research or in the community, thank you for participating in the first Science to Practice Forum. The forum is an integral part of the Future Drought Fund's work. The $5 billion fund, its objective is to build drought resilience, providing farmers and regional communities with opportunities to manage future climatic challenges, including drought. Innovation is the key to building resilience, and we've come together to innovate for these next 3 days. Through the Future Drought Fund, the Australian Government has established drought resilience hubs to give farmers and rural and regional communities the tools they need to transform their businesses and communities to be more resilient to our increasingly drier climate. Our drought hubs are designed to create a culture of collaboration, of teaming, to build drought resilience, to make farming businesses more profitable and productive, and to deliver public benefits by creating a more coherent agricultural innovation system able to adapt to our rapidly changing world. The hubs will directly engage with farmers and their communities to deliver innovation where it's needed most, on the ground, at the farm level. And although all 8 of our hubs are in unique farming and climatic zones, their shared purpose, their shared national purpose, is to help build a world-class agricultural innovation system that's profitable and sustainable forever. These hubs encourage a new approach to national drought resilience, and their innovation success is dependent on how we all work together, on how we all collaborate and communicate effectively. Now, folks, we can't control future droughts, but we can better prepare for them by working together. And if we share existing knowledge and ideas across commodities, all agricultural sectors will benefit. Now, I know that some land managers already share existing research and local ideas to their region's benefit. And we believe that the hubs will drive this approach within all regions and contribute to a national scale effort to improve system coordination and integration and create a more flexible and adaptable industry capable of responding to big global drivers and trends. The hubs very much align with the Australian Government's broader agricultural innovation agenda and our vision for world-class innovation precincts. Innovation is core to the hubs and to the Future Drought Fund. And we will use world-class innovation to increase agricultural productivity and stability, whatever the weather and whatever the climate. The opportunity we now need to foster is ensuring the hubs work collaboratively to become true national and global centres of excellence. So I very much encourage your active participation and engagement over the next 3 years. The hubs are meant to make available knowledge and tools in a practical way, to be open to forging new networks, strengthening those you've already made, and taking on new ideas, often from others that you'll be talking with over the next few days. So by hearing from each other's voices, in listening to each other, we can innovate and transform our agricultural industry and indeed our regional communities to become more resilient to drought in the future. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you to deliver on your hub's priorities to build the foundations for drought resilience. I hope you make the most of the next 3 days, and I really look forward to working with you in the future.
Metcalfe there from the Department of Agriculture and Water and the Environment, and a team, the FDF team from DOR, have been integral to us arriving where we are now for this 3-day forum. The team, along with the production team from Content Group, are literally just to one side here in the studio, holding my hand and making sure we get around the country over the next 3 days. We've already got a poll up, have a look at that. The comments section is there. And just a reminder that if your screen does freeze up, we're already having people saying they're having a wee bit of tech trouble there, just refresh your screen and it should all come right. Technology, please be on our side. We've heard messages of welcome. Now let's get really down to tin tacks. We're going to hear from Louise Palfreyman here in Canberra, just up the road here at the department. She's the Assistant Secretary with responsibility for FDF, and there is Louise. And by the miracle of technology, we will also be going back to southeast Queensland, to Brent Finlay's cattle and sheep property there. He's taking a morning off from them at least, and I'm going to hand over to Louise and Brent to talk about the Future Drought Fund and to set up our discussions over the next days. Over to you.
Thanks, Andrew, again, yeah, my sheep and cattle are probably relieved that I'm not out there chasing them around this morning. But I'm looking forward to the next 3 days, as I said before. It's just, this is really exciting for the Future Drought Fund, and just again urging everybody to this is our opportunity to give this our all. A history, I guess, a brief history of the Future Drought Fund. No, it was one of the first legislation passed in the Parliament after the election, the re-election of the Morrison government. The committee that I have the honour of chairing, and we came together in September 19, and their first task was to put together a draft plan, the overarching plan that actually guides the Future Drought Fund for 4 years. We did that. We put a plan together with the help of the department and the FDF team in the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. We then went to what was really critical, out to public consultation. We also took submissions on that plan. So for 6 weeks, we traversed the country doing public meetings, meetings with key stakeholders, getting a feel for what they thought of the draft plan, but also what was really important in their communities, in their farming systems and the landscapes in which we farm, about how we could actually build resilience for the future. Like the name says, Future Drought Fund, this is not about in drought now. There are other agencies that look after that and other programs that look after that. This is very much about the future. So we came back after public consultation at the end of 19, put together the plan. The plan went to the Parliament as a disallowable instrument in February 2020. Then COVID hit, as we all know, and being, I guess, challenged by that yet again right now across the country. And then we had to do 15 days in the House of Representatives as a disallowable instrument and 15 days in the Senate. It passed the Senate on the last sitting day in June last year. I had the honour to stand up with Minister Littleproud on the 1st of July and announce 8 foundation programs. So there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes to get to that announcement. And then at the end of July, we opened the first program, which is the Natural Resource Management Program, what we call our Landscapes Program, on the 1st of July. So that was quick, and it's been a heck of a year, and we're just finishing our foundation year, and I'm proud to say that the 100 million that is to be allocated every year has been allocated for this year. It's been a lot of work by a lot of people, but it's also work by people, yourselves included, that have actually made applications to the various programs for funding through the Future Drought Fund. The Research and Adoption Hubs, as I said before, are just one program that is actually being funded, and shortly I'll go to Louise to actually take you around what we call our stakeholder pie chart. We have regular meetings with stakeholders, and And if you're not on our list that we come to annoy you or talk to you, please register on the department website to be there, because we enjoy it, but it's getting the feedback on how the programs are tracking, what we're doing. But it's also, and we said this through public consultation, now the ideas that come forward for the Future Drought Fund are your ideas. They're not the committee's ideas. They're not the department's ideas. We use a term, we harvest your ideas as we go around it, and hopefully where we can, we put them into programs, and then those programs open. So it's always changing, and I encourage everybody to remain connected. We talked before about this unique opportunity that this fund is, and that's why it's up to all of us to make it work, to actually get the best out of it. Each plan lasts for 4 years. In another 3 years, there'll be a new plan that'll come in. And the committee, if we've done a good job, there probably won't be major changes to that plan, but who knows? So that's part of being engaged and being still engaged. I'd like to now just go to Louise, because there's a little bit of work in this pie chart, but it actually shows how all these programs are interconnected, and that's really important. The research and adoption hubs are connected into a number of these other programs. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Brent. I guess it's my pleasure to talk you through these programs. It's, as Brent said, $100 million is committed to various programs in our first year. 1st of July, we didn't waste any time. And I'm going to talk to you about the progress that we've made this year, a few days left of this financial year, and last month's federal budget built on these foundational programs, and another $170.5 million was committed over the next 3 years to keep on with this, extend and expand these programs. So like Brent said, we are consulting as we go, and we're at the early stages of planning, I guess, for the next round of programs for the next financial year that follows. And because this is new, I guess 1 year still makes us fairly new. It is important that we learn and adapt as we go. So like Brent says, we're really interested in hearing back from you, and I'll give you some clues on how you can kind of keep that, that feedback loop going with us as we talk along. So I'm going to talk through the picture that you can see on your screen. And as you will see, there is a lot of action here in the FDF. So to simplify the story, I'm going to talk about it in the 5 themes that I've sort of highlighted on our pie chart. So I'm going to start with better risk management. Drought is inevitable in our landscape, and we're working to improve risk management practices. And we've got 2 programs which is focused on this. So there's $119 million out to 23-24 being allocated to this aspect of the Future Drought Fund's activities. And we've got 2 programs which are being delivered in partnerships with our states and territories. And what's great about this is that all these programs are tailored. So they've got local context, local advice. They build on state government programs where there's something existing. And so some of them will be a little bit different from each other, but they have those the benefits of all that on-ground experience for what matters for the people who are living in those states and territories and regions. So the 2 programs that we have running at the moment are Farm Business Resilience Program, and that's all about building the capability of farmers to plan for the potential impact of drought in their business. And we want to reach 17,000 farmers in the next 3 years, which is a big goal, but doable. Then the other program under this better risk management category is Regional Drought Resilience Planning. And that's all about working with local councils and regional stakeholders to understand what needs to be done at a regional level to build drought resilience. So we want to have plans in place across all agricultural regions and to start working on implementing these plans over the next 3 years. And so a very significant amount of money has been allocated from the Commonwealth for this, I think I mentioned before, $119 million. We've had a lot of announcements more recently of each state and territory's commitment to this, and we'll be working with them as we look to extend these programs and keep on developing them. So there's a lot of work in this space. And for those that are interested on the line, your local, state and territory government is the place to go for the delivery of these, and also, of course, more information on our website too. I'm going to move down to the better climate information on the screen here, and have a chat about this one. It's $25 million allocated to working on this aspect of building drought resilience, and clearly better management of drought and other climate risks needs good information, so people can assess what the risks that they're facing and assess the conditions and make decisions based on that. So CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology have been developing a climate services platform, and that's to make the climate information, historical and future, more accessible and more useful for the average person, and to get this down to quite a small degree of regionality, so that you can see the impact in your area, in your local area, and about how it might affect your particular farm. So related to this is a self-assessment tool that we've been working on with Deloitte, and this is to allow farmers to add in their own data and to get a farm scale perspective. So you'll be able to assess climate risk and resilience on your own property related to what you're doing on your property. So it's pretty exciting, actually. Where we're up to now is that we have prototypes which will be available quite soon, and this is the start of the process. What we're trying to do is build on the capability of the platform and the tool as it progressively, and what we are seeking is feedback on those things. So we'll be out there quite soon to deliver this and to share where we're up to now, and we just want it to be very useful for farmers and others, and we'll be engaging extensively on this one. I'm going to move across to the more resilient communities now, and we all know, and others have already spoken about this already, about the importance of community leaders and networks and mentors and organisations at a local level playing a critical role in driving conversations and getting prepared for future drought. So communities help people in tough times. They help them stay strong in times of drought, and they're also there for getting ready as well. So social resilience is one of the 3 objectives of the Future Drought Funding Plan. It's really important. We have 2 programs at the moment which are launched and out. The Drought Resilience Leaders Program has over $7 million of funding, and we've partnered with the Australian Rural Leaders Foundation, and they've started their work to develop a cohort of up to 480 drought resilience leaders, and building networks, national networks, for up to 550 people in a mentoring network to address drought resilience, and to have people learning from other farmers and being supported in their local community and with, I guess, like-minded people. So that's quite exciting. The other program that we have already at the moment out is networks to build drought resilience, and that's been delivered by the Foundation for the Rural and Regional Renewal, and it has a call open right now for microscale projects to support community networks and organisations and infrastructure that build drought resilience. So there's another over $3 million allocated to that program at the moment, and in future years we have more money allocated to this. Just shy of $20 million being allocated to this so far, and just a lot of action underway. The next part of our, I guess, investment is flaghead as better land management. And so this is all about land management practices and supporting natural resource management activity. And to date, there's $38 million being allocated to this aspect of the Future Drought Fund. So there's lots of examples of farmers who have been able to do better than others through the recent drought because of how they've managed their land and managed the natural resources that they have around them. And environmental resilience is, of course, one of the 3 objectives of the Future Drought Funding Plan, and it's very important to us. We've got 80 projects already commenced and underway that will be testing and supporting the adoption of land management practices that will help the land stay more productive in times of drought. And just to, I guess, trial and promote some of those practices. So we had in the recent budget another $23 million allocated. So we've got projects underway. We'll have new projects which we'll be able to support in the future. And those new projects will be targeting innovation and transformation. We'll be consulting people on the design. As you'll hear, it's a very strong theme for what we do at the FDF, making sure that what we're doing is fit for purpose, not an idea that's cooked up in the laneway in Canberra, but something that's real and meaningful and going to do its job where we need it to. So the new program for better land management, focusing on soils and landscapes, will be open late this year, but we'll be out and about chatting to people about that beforehand. And I guess the 5th element of, what we have been investing in for the Future Drought Fund comes as no surprise with harnessing innovation. With one of the landmark things here is, of course, the 8 adoption and innovation hubs, which we've established around the country, and many of you are either aligned with those hubs or maybe present in those hubs today. And, we're really excited about Australia's farming history, a long history of innovating to respond to the challenges of the Australian climate. And with the hubs coming on board and their various partners, we're really excited about what we can do together. The strong focus on co-design with end users and responding to regional needs and opportunities is we're hoping, high hopes that we're going to drive quite hard the new development and adoption of more drought resilient technology and practices for Australia, because that's what it's all about, working forward and paying it down now so that the next drought, when it hits, will be so many steps ahead of the game. In this this sort of wedge of the pie about innovation, there's $117 million being allocated at this already, and some of the other aspects, other than the hubs, which have been funded for 4 years, is also the Research and Adoption Investment Plan, and that brings a national perspective on priorities and, it'll be complementing, the work of the hubs, and you'll be hearing more from that across the next few days. We also have an innovation grants process, which is going to be launching soon. We're just tidying up the ends of that before it is launched, and that's going to be an excellent opportunity to get support for the many good ideas that are out there in the community about how we can improve drought resilience. And there'll be a focus on development and extension, adoption, commercialisation, and we'll be really excited to see what comes forward to that. So we're certainly looking forward to getting that out to you to respond to. I guess the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is we've got so much work going on, as Brent mentioned, one day through Parliament, the next day launching programs. We've had no mean feat to kind of get everything out and about. And of course, every year, $100 million is such a wonderful opportunity to do some really great work in Australia, preparing ourselves for that next inevitable drought when it happens. And it's really important that we design programs, and we're testing and learning and adapting our approaches as we go. So we have developed a monitoring, evaluation and learning framework, which is available on our website. And that's how we'll be measuring and reporting on changes to drought resilience and testing the impact of the programs and the fund as a whole. So this is really important to what we do, and we're really interested to hear from others and our grantees, of course, who are delivering programs for us and testing new ideas and getting them out there. But we'll be sharing some of the impact that we've already had through public reporting. So our first annual report will be coming out in October this year. And more formally, the FDF will be evaluated every 4 years by the Productivity Commission. So the first review will be in 2023-24. And so as you can see, nothing is static here. We have a plan which is set up for forward investment. We have processes to make sure that we're hitting the mark and adapting and learning as we're going. We've got a lot of emphasis on meeting our stakeholders and taking their input. And there'll be formal reviews of our performance and what we can do better. And I think that you understand that there is great willingness to learn and adapt. We're always keen to talk. Before I kind of flick back to Brent on this one, I guess I just want to let you know how you can share information or get in contact with us. Our email address is drought.resilience@awe.gov.au, which is readily available on the FDF website. And you can keep in touch with what's happening with the fund by subscribing to our Have Your Say website. And that's found at haveyoursay.awe.gov.au. So yeah, I just would encourage you to get in contact, get involved. We are very interested in your ideas, and we're working very hard to get new programs out and impact on the ground.
Thanks, Louise. That was great, and hopefully by seeing the pie chart, you actually can see how all these programs are interlinked, as I said before, and that's really important. And that, I guess, the programs were constructed on the back of the feedback that we took through public consultation, but also it evolves as we go through meeting with key stakeholders, and then Louise has given out all the contact points for us. So please, I encourage you to contact us and tell us what you're thinking, or if you've got ideas, please do, and someone from the department will come back to you. And it's great, travelling around. If you see me or any of the team somewhere, bowl up and say g'day. That's assuming we can travel around, and when we can travel around again, come up and have a chat. I really encourage that. And I know we'll be doing a number of public events around the country, and hopefully soon we'll actually have a list of those, where we are, what we're going to be doing, and for all the hubs, yes, I know. Hopefully I will get to come and see you soon. You're engaged with the team, now headed up by Michelle. It's great. There's a lot of work to do. We know that. The next 3 days are going to be very special. One of the key things that's in the plan, and to keep this, I guess it's transformational. We're looking for transformational change, and for future building resilience for droughts. That's our thinking we need to do. So those ideas that can lead to significant change in our farming systems, or how we manage our landscapes, but also how we help the communities in which we live and which we thrive, and that's what we want to do. We want to be able to thrive, so that after the next drought, our recovery is so much quicker. We're not dented anywhere near as what we have been previously, and we certainly, those of us who have been around farming for a while, have got a fair bit of experience in this area. The opportunity is great. Please grasp that. And I'm, again, looking forward to the next 3 days for the ideas that are coming forward, looking forward to each hub talking about what they're planning to do, about the co-design that you're going to do. So important. This is about you, your region, and your partners, and how we can actually dovetail into that to help support you. So Andrew, back to you, and thank you everybody for your time, and yes, let's get on with it.
Thanks very much, Brent and Louise. Don't go away. Can I just ask you one question? In a former life, I used to run Wind News in the central west of New South Wales, which covered Orange, Dubbo and Wagga. And I can remember us doing a big drought special in the middle of the 90s. So how much more different are we hoping this will be this time around? Have lessons been learnt from those times? I don't know who can speak to that, but it seems we are now more looking over the horizon than looking what's in front of us at the moment. Brent, Louise, jump in.
Yeah, no, I agree, Andrew, and that was part of what came back to us through that public consultation phase. You know, this is not business as usual, and don't think that this fund is about business as usual. Yeah, sure, it's difficult to move quickly, and some of these things take long-term change. We understand that, but to actually have the resources, which is now there in a fund, a $5 billion fund that underpins that $100 million a year every year. We have 4-year plans. And no, the only way that this can change is if a government in the future, and we know what governments can do, if they choose to change that. So this is, I think, and in my experience, probably the best opportunity that we've got to actually make real change. And that's why when I talked about collaboration before, we have to do this together. And it's those ideas that say, well, okay, we've been doing this, we're not getting anywhere. Why don't we try this? Let's have a look at this, but also how we can actually help our farmers change. We know some farmers are right at the cutting edge all the time, and help them go even further forward than that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that, sorry there. What I was going to say was that, you know, the opportunity here is to target with this fund so many dimensions at once. When droughts have hit in the past, of course, the government has helped people who need help, but this is about getting ahead of the game and targeting so many areas, working collaboratively across different parts of the industry, different parts of the community and the landscape. So all working as one to kind of build this drought resilience, you know, from the ground up and attacking it from lots of different angles. So with all these activities, I know I threw out a lot of program names and dollars that we've spent, but it really is a holistic view. And I guess that's the kind of the point with the funding plan, looking at it from those 3 pillars of economic, social and environmental resilience and how it works together to really make that big difference. So we know the next drought will happen at some point. We don't know what date that's going to turn up for different parts. And I do note that there are parts of Australia that are still experiencing some pretty serious drought conditions in pockets of Australia. So some people are still experiencing that as well. It's not like it's done and dusted. And I guess that's what we're building towards, is just that next level of skills and infrastructure and community and resilience, which is what we talk about, to make sure that next time things will be so much better and that we're learning and adapting, and there's just so much opportunities to share some of those success stories and what would work previously.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Brent. And if I may, in the style of Q&A, make this a comment, not a question. It seems to me the difference between now and the mid-90s, when we were sat in the studio in Orange talking about drought, there was some very much siloed thinking those days, and it was about getting past this hurdle. Now we're aware that the hurdle is always going to be there. This is the country we live in. And this collaboration between various disciplines, people on the ground, people in academic institutions, and others with ideas and experience can only help us. Let's take a look at one of the presentations that has already arrived to us here. And remember, some of these presentations were done way before we got into the last few days of COVID conniption. So let's take a look at a presentation called FarmSmart.
My first experience with drought in Australia was in 1991. I was working on a sheep station out in the goldfields, and I'd be working in 45 degrees heat, fencing and looking up at the sky going, God, I wish it would rain. Eventually it did, and I remember when it did, we ran outside in the middle of the night and stood under the rain, and it was just the most amazing feeling. My life journey has taken me from a Jillaroo out in the goldfields to now an agricultural economist working in research. And the common thread through all my time in my work journey has been looking at drought and building resilience for farm enterprises as a rural financial counsellor for quite a few years, and then working for state government in economics and policy. I've really looked at what makes a resilient business and how we can make businesses more resilient and coping with droughts and risk mitigation. myFARMSMART was really developed because it was a solution to a problem on our farms. I'm also a broadacre farmer working with my husband. He kept asking me, well, what if we do this or what if we do that? And I couldn't ever answer those questions quickly enough, despite having the skills as an agriculture economist. And I thought it was just astonishing that we haven't got a tool available to us to help us make some really informed and really good decisions with all the variables that there are when you make those type of decisions. I thought that we should, as an industry, build something that could help farmers make more informed decisions and really build that resilience in their businesses. That's why I really developed myFARMSMART. myFARMSMART, it's a business analysis tool for farmers. It looks at the what if for them, so it does scenario planning and it gives them a really good idea of how their farm's performing. It generates a 3-year profit and loss and a 3-year balance sheet, so they can really look at their farming system and compare one farming system to another, and it provides some risk management ratios and really helps them to make some really informed decisions as the season unfolds in front of them. It uses production data and it uses the farm's data. So we bring together rainfall data and we bring together historical pasture growth rate data and the farm's data. And that's all in myFARMSMART, and as the farmer puts his own data in, it calculates, it's like a big calculator in the back of it, and it calculates that farm's profit and loss. It calculates their gross margins for them. It calculates what their operating surplus is, what their profit is. You can start seeing and understanding how each enterprise is performing, and you can start making some decisions about what enterprises you want to have. And what's really good about it is you can start looking at how those enterprises perform in different seasonal conditions and what impact like a poor season might have on that enterprise. I saw an opportunity to access some funding with a work colleague of mine, and we worked with 2 grower groups in the Eastern Wheat Belt, so in the low rainfall environment, and those 2 grower groups were Meriden and District's Farm Improvement Group and the Far Eastern Agricultural Research Group. So we worked with those growers to develop myFARMSMART. So we really looked at what the end user wanted, really to understand what farmers were really looking for in a decision support tool like we were building, and we used focus groups. I did a lot of consultation with industry experts and also farm consultants. And I developed this big Excel spreadsheet. And as we were developing it, we realised how powerful it was becoming and what you could actually do with it. But we got to a point where we realised that we couldn't give this to farmers to use. It wasn't going to be practical. And that's when we started to really look at, well, what solutions do we have for that, and how can we give a tool like this to farmers that's really easy to use, that they could access really easily. Some of the young guys said, well, we want it on our phone. So that was sort of a bit of a seed for us right at the beginning of the journey, but it wasn't what we thought we'd ever do. Midway through the journey, we saw the potential to make it an online tool, and we've actually achieved that. As part of the journey, we saw the opportunity to attend an accelerator, like a commercialisation accelerator program, which was being run by AgriStart, and that was the Harvest 2.0 program. We saw that suddenly as an opportunity that maybe that might help us look at how we could actually take this Excel spreadsheet and what we could do with it and how we could maybe commercialise it. We saw that opportunity to really have a look at, what the process was to do that, and that program probably accelerated our thinking by 12 months and gave us the networks, the people to talk to work out how we could do it. And it was invaluable. And from that program, we went through that process of engaging with software companies, talking to different software companies to see how, what the options were and how we could take this Excel spreadsheet into a software program. So from each stage of the development, we've managed to see a clear pathway forward and go, okay, that's what we have to do next to get to that commercialisation. I'm still learning how to market it and we're still learning what else farmers want in it to make it a really successful and commercial product. And that's the challenge, is trying to farmers understand that it's still in development phase, and for them to realise that they could jump on board now and grow with it. As we develop into the future, it will, we're looking at how we can bolt on new things. We're looking at how we can collaborate with other tech providers so that we can bring in data and share data. myFARMSMART will continually develop and continually respond to the market applications and from our feedback from our users. So it will continually develop. Taking it into that online product, makes it so much more accessible. And what it allows is all that background updates to occur without you even realising, and that's pretty powerful for farmers.
Innovation is a tricky word, isn't it? Because what's sauce for one goose is not necessarily sauce for the gander, but the mindset of innovation can help us approach a different kind of problem with eyes that see things a little bit differently. Lloyd Symons is in Hobart. He's Polar Technology Manager at the Australian Antarctic Division, which lives in Kingston, Tasmania, a lovely 30-minute drive, as I recall, out of Hobart, south of Hobart. And he's going to be talking to us with a Q&A session to come at the end of his presentation about innovation driving science and exploration and learning lessons. So if you have any questions during Lloyd's presentation, please type them in and we'll get to them. But now we've gone from southeast Queensland to Canberra. We're now going down south to Hobart. Come in, Lloyd.
Just start by introducing myself as Lloyd Symons, the Polar Technology Manager for the Australian Antarctic Division. It does seem a little odd to me to be talking about Antarctic innovation at a drought forum, but I am reminded that Antarctica is a large, dry, isolated continent, and it could be that there could be some useful parallels between our experience and your experience. So in this talk, I'm going to introduce the Technology and Innovation branch of the Australian Antarctic Division, which is where I work. I'm going to question your fundamental understanding of the place of Antarctica and even the existence of the Southern Ocean. I'm going to talk about our general approach to innovation. Okay, I believe we're still having some difficulty with slides, so I think someone up there probably needs to move the slides along when I say next, please. So if we could just take it to the Innovation in Antarctica slide and take it to the bottom of the slide. And finally, I'm going to talk about an example of innovation that we've conducted at the Australian Antarctic Division, which is deep ocean acoustic recorders. Next slide, please. So we should be looking at our place in the scheme of things, which is just the Technology and Innovation branch, which is part of down the bottom there, which is part of the Australian Antarctic Division. And that's how we sort of slot into the department. Next slide. So we have a 20-year action plan and Antarctic strategy. That's a very long and complicated document. And if we just go to the next, you'll see that our mission is really expressed in 3 words, which is, Antarctica valued, protected, and understood. Next slide. And if you could just take it all the way to the end of that slide. So you'll see that the purpose of the Technology and Innovation branch is to lead the design and development of new technology for the Australian Antarctic program. And we're not trying to do everything by ourselves. We're very interested in working with other people because, together with other organisations, we can achieve much more. Next slide. So in order to understand things, we need to understand our operating environment. I'm going to talk a little bit to you about Antarctic and the Southern Ocean. Next slide. So this map, which is a fairly conventional map of the world, and probably the way that we all saw the world when we were looking through atlases 20 or 30 years ago, is shows Antarctica at the bottom there. So it's this sort of long, stretched out piece of ice that just appears at the bottom of the world, and that would lead you to think that Antarctica is sort of off at the edge of things. Next slide. But fortunately these days we have Google Earth, and that allows us to have a slightly more realistic visualization of Antarctica. And so we can see Antarctica as being this large icy continent somewhere to the south of Australia. Next. And just to provide some sort of sense of scale, that shows you the relative size of Australia and the Antarctic. So we can see Antarctica is quite a large continent, and the yellow shaded area is, of course, the Australian Antarctic Territory. So we are talking about a quite substantial piece of territory. Next slide. And it's worth understanding the difference. What is so special about the Antarctic? And in this projection, you can, looking down on the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, you can see next that the Arctic is an ocean surrounded by continents. Next. And but whereas the Antarctic is actually the opposite, it's a continent surrounded by oceans. Next. And because Antarctica is a continent that's surrounded by oceans, this gives rise to a large circulating oceanic current, which is known as the circumpolar current. And what that current does is it isolates the Antarctic and actually keeps it cold. It acts as a bit of a barrier. And the other interesting thing about the circumpolar current is that it flows through the southern end of the three major oceans, of course, being the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Pacific. So it's extremely connected to the rest of the world. Next. So if you just click through to the end of this slide, you'll see there's a few things that are sort of special about the Antarctic as a result of that circumpolar current. The Antarctic, it's colder, it's higher, and it's more isolated than the Arctic, and that gives rise to things like this really massive ice cap, which is about 14 million square kilometres. If we compare that with Greenland, which is less than 2 million square kilometres. Of course, we have the Antarctic ozone hole, and the average surface elevation of the Antarctic is about 2,000 metres, and the average depth of the Southern Ocean is about 4,000 metres. So quite an extreme kind of land and seascape that we're dealing with. And just on that last point there, it gives rise to a very significant annual fluctuation of the sea ice zone, which you'll see in the next slide. Next. So what you can see there is that over the course of a year, the floating ice around the Antarctic is enormously variable. So in February, we've got relatively small amounts of ice around the continent at the end of summer, whereas in September, which is the end of winter, or the cold winter period, the continent's almost more than doubled in size. And what you can see is that because of that sea ice locking up the continent during the winter time, that means that we really can't get there. So we're really quite restricted in our access to Antarctica to the summer months. We could move to the next slide, which is about the Southern Ocean. So, you know, there's this interesting question as to whether the Southern Ocean actually even exists, which is a curious question for people who spent their entire life studying it. But if we just click to the end of that slide, you'll see that the Southern Ocean just this month in June was actually recognised by the National Geographic. So if you look at on maps, you won't see the Southern Ocean actually used very much, but it does look like as of this month that situation is going to change. But the Southern Ocean is hasn't really been recognised in the way that it should be. Next slide. And if you just click through to the end of that slide, you'll see lots of scientific extracts of people puzzling about the fact that their climate models don't work very well when it comes to the Southern Ocean. And I guess the take-home message there in terms of climate modelling, there's an awful lot to do in the Southern Ocean. And one really big question in the Southern Ocean at the moment is it giving up carbon dioxide or is it absorbing it? And probably it's doing both, and understanding that is really key. Next slide. And finally, just to bring it to the end of this geography lesson, you can see this thing called, it's another way to project the surface of the Earth on a two-dimensional surface, but it's an alternative way which sort of emphasises the oceans instead of the land. And it's called the Spillhouse map projection. And this is a very interesting one because you'll see that Antarctica is really at the centre of things. And if we click through to the end of that slide, you'll see basically the world's oceanic currents as connecting all of those oceans. So you can see in this, perhaps the northern hemisphere is not really at the centre at the top of the map. Perhaps Antarctica should be really considered to be in the centre of things when it comes to climate. Next slide. So we'll talk about our approach to innovation. Next. So our drivers for innovation, if we could just click through to the end of that slide. So we have a very large territory, both in terms of a continent and an ocean, in which we need to maintain an effective presence. And putting people into the field is a very expensive process for us, and it has a lot of risk attached to it. And as also the prospect of failure is very expensive because it costs a lot of money to send ships and aeroplanes and people down to the Antarctic. So if we don't succeed in what we do, then that is not a good outcome. But so we're very interested in innovation, but there are a lot of things to consider in if we move to the next slide, innovation caveats, and click through that. So adding more technology to a problem doesn't always improve the situation. And it's really easy to build a complex technological sort of construct that falls down and very easily. And the example I think of is when the internet goes out at the office these days, everybody has to go home because all of our files are on the share drive, which is where we were told to put them. And so, you know, these things work very well when everything's in place, but they don't always, you know, they're not always as robust as we'd like them to be. And the Antarctic and Southern Ocean technology, for our purposes, it really does need to be very robust for obvious reasons, but it also needs to be very self-contained with not too many dependencies on other complex systems like, you know, the internet, for example. And also things need to be very easily repairable and they all very highly reliable so that they don't need to be repaired. But in reality, they probably need to be both. Next slide. So just talking about the constraints to our technological innovation. So just if we could just click through those. So we've got our constraints are energy. So we're almost certainly always operating off the grid. So there's no power point to plug into. Communications is a problem. We don't have the NBN down south, but we use satellites and they're getting better, but they're still quite limited and expensive. We've got environmental considerations. We can't just do whatever we like. We've got regulations that we need to follow. We're operating in the Australian Antarctic territory and we're subject to lots of laws and regulations, just the same way that we are back in Australia. And of course, there's the access issue for us. We can only physically get to Antarctica in the summertime, you know, when the ice opens up. And of course, there are no shops. So, you know, if we forget or we break something down south, then it's up to another year before delivery. So just sort of talking through a few points, if you want to just click through to the end of that slide, our approach to new technology. So, you know, we have to ask ourselves when we're introducing something, is it meeting a genuine need? You know, is it going to be safe? Because the consequences of an accident for us in Antarctica are extreme. You know, we're a long way from hospitals and big support systems. And we have to consider the total cost, you know, not only in the initial outlay, but also what the ongoing commitment to maintain that technology is going to be. And we have to think about the flow-on effects. You know, are we building unhealthy dependencies? If we do something in a particular way, is that going to mean that we'll do something else that depends on that? And when we want to stop doing that earlier thing, will we cause problems? And the other thing is just that displacement effect. You know, we always have to ask ourselves, if we do this activity, you know, what does that mean that we're not going to do as a result of that? And then if we move to the next slide about implementation and click through to the end of that. So just some more sort of principles that we have to think about. So we're always interested in, can we actually buy something and adapt it for use in the Antarctic? is there someone who can actually contract for this? Because we don't always, we don't have to do everything ourselves. Sometimes there are commercial providers. And importantly, there's a lot of government agencies in Australia who have, really good expertise and capabilities in lots of areas. And so often we can tap into that. And just finally on that slide, in-house development is very expensive. It's time consuming and it's very, very fraught with risk. So, we don't indulge in that unless we absolutely have to. So sort of that leads to the question, if we click through to the next slide, why do we ever innovate at all? Because, sometimes we find ourselves, all alone in an odd little niche because we're trying to do, weird and unusual things in weird and unusual places and that no one else wants to do, which is part of the joy of working for Antarctic Division, but it's also, one of the great challenges as well. So I wanted, if we can click through to the example of innovation. So again, a little odd to be talking about whales, but this is an interesting sort of innovation example for us, deep ocean acoustic recorders. So if we click to the next slide, we can talk about the problem. So the problem in this case was that we know that whales are the big cogs in the Southern Ocean ecosystem. So they are the sort of top predators predating upon the krill, which predate upon the phytoplankton. But, how do we monitor whale populations in the Southern Ocean? Next slide. So, whales aren't always as easy to spot as this humpback whale that's sleeping out of the water. If we just click to the next, what you'll see, that's actually, I've got a lot of whale photos from my time in the Antarctic and most of them look like this. They don't look like the previous one. So whales don't always make themselves very easy to identify. People often ask me if I've seen a blue whale and I say maybe. I've seen a lot of whales, but I can't really identify them. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that it is possible to identify humpback whales in other ways. So if we look at these three examples, humpback whales, minke whales, and killer whales, they all have different noises that they make, different frequencies, different patterns that are quite distinctive. And so that means that if we can hear those acoustic signatures, we can do species identification. We can even, on occasion, identify individuals. So if we click through to this next slide, I'll just ask you to click through to the end there. So if we can't visually see whales, can we listen for them? And so the answer to this problem for us was, trying to figure out how we could build systems to give high fidelity audio recordings in the Southern Ocean, thousands of miles away from Australia. And, of course, you can build some fancy underwater recording equipment. That's actually the relatively easy bit. The complicated bit for us was considering how we could integrate that into our logistics operation, because it costs a lot of money. It costs about $100,000 a day to deploy ships. So, and we're talking about deploying these whale recorders in locations that are 2,000 metres deep and ice covered in winter. And of course, we don't want to send people down on long voyages just to do 1 day of recovery work. But if we go to the next slide, we've developed this thing, acoustics mooring, which is a high quality electronics, piece of electronics which makes high fidelity recordings, but it's attached to a mooring which sinks to the bottom of the ocean. So you can see a weight down the bottom there that takes it down to the bottom of the ocean. The electronics is floating above that on about a 20-metre strap, and there's some acoustic releases. That doesn't make a great deal of sense. Hopefully the next slides will perhaps explain that a little bit more clearly. But inside the heart of the whale mooring is this complicated electronics, which is kept safe from 2,000 metres of seawater sitting above it by this very, very strong glass sphere. Go to the next slide. And just before we get into the detail, let's also comment that it's not just about whales. There are lots of other things in the Southern Ocean or in any ocean that make noise, including seals. Ice, as it jostles about, makes a lot of noise. Ships, so we can hear ships. And we can also hear the wind as well, even from 2,000 metres down. If we go to the next slide, it just gives you an idea of what it looks like. So look, for those of you who are Doctor Who fans, and we're on the deployment slide now, it looks a little bit like we're lowering a Dalek into the deep ocean. And it is indeed, well, you can see the scale there with the person who's standing on the deck there deploying it. So It's all contained, all the electronics is contained within that, that module. We click to the next slide, logistical constraints, just giving you an idea of where we're putting these things. So I'll ask you to click through to the end of that slide. So our moorings have to be deployed in water no deeper than 2,000 metres. So we can't put them any deeper than that because there are some constraints on how deep we can go. We have to put them in places that are regularly visited by our vessels and that are ice-free, which means that they have to go close to the Antarctic continent but be ice-free, which is always a problem. And so you can see that we've chosen locations that are on our shipping routes that go to our stations, Casey, Davis and Mawson. So we just go to the deployment slide. So I'm just going to, whoever's controlling the slides up there might just want to slowly click through this a couple of seconds, about 3 or 4 seconds each slide. So we can see our ship comes in to the location. The whale mooring is tossed over the side where it sinks to the bottom, and then our ship sort of sails away. And that's the deployment operation in a nutshell. And then if we go to the operation over 12 months, we can first see the ice forming on top of the ocean there. And then we can see some whales hopefully swimming in as they swim past the mooring. And of course, they'll do their thing and sing their songs and make the noises that they make. And the system will sit there for 12 months and just sort of operate. And then 12 months later, hopefully that ice that's on top of the, if we can move to the recovery slide, 12 months later, hopefully the ice will eventually disappear. It doesn't always happen. The ship will come back, and then we will send an acoustic ping down to the instrument, and that will actually cause the acoustic releases to release, and after about 45 minutes, the mooring will return to the surface where it can be picked up by the ship. And then the ship sails away. So that's sort of how it's integrated into our operation. That operation takes about 3 or 4 hours with the deployment and the recovery operation. So if we click to the next slide, what makes the deep ocean acoustic recorder a good candidate for in-house innovation? So in this case, we just couldn't get anything that was commercially available. You can go and buy acoustic recorders, but they are really only designed to be deployed for a few months in, relatively shallow water. So there's not much that's designed to sort of self-exist for a year, and they have very short recording times, in terms of months, not years. And our sites are really unique, being, they're ice covered, they're thousands of miles away from civilization, and we only get there once a year. And it had to slot into our existing operation opportunistically. So really the design of the recorder was the small part. The big part was thinking about how we could slot it into a logistics operation that made sense for us. And just that point down the bottom, if we don't make it easy, then this just won't be done. So it's important to sort of think about making this an easy thing to operate. So if we just go to the results slide there. So this is just showing the ocean recorder being lowered into the Southern Ocean, just a few sort of details there. So it takes us about 4 hours, as I said. This is to deploy one of these moorings at sites at about 1,780 metres on the Kerguelen Plateau. Our record for deployment is that one unit was down there for almost 4 years before we got it back, because every time we went back 4 years, there was too much ice over the site to release the mooring, but we did get it back. And we've had, as you'll see down the bottom there, we've had 19 out of 20 devices successfully recovered. The 20th device did actually come to the surface, but unfortunately it got sucked into the ship's thrusters. So we got most of the way there, but I say 19 out of 20 is not bad. So just looking at this quick snapshot of some of the acoustic results. So this is an acoustic sort of spectrum, I guess, if you're showing the different things that we've been able to pick up with this device. So we can see our blue and fin whales down there in the bottom left-hand corner, and then the Antarctic minke whales emitting sort of slightly higher frequencies in the middle of the season there, and the leopard seals appearing up on the top right-hand corner there, appearing later in the season. And you can see also that massive yellow at the beginning and the end of the slide, which is when the recorder is free of ice. So that's when there's no ice over the recorder, and we get a lot more wave noise. And you'll note in the middle of the slide there, it's a little bit quieter. And that's largely because the ice is sort of frozen over the site and quietened things down, but not completely, because we did pick up a few storms happening on the surface far above. So I'm just going to take you to this final slide, which is just some of the, a nice recording, hopefully you can hear it, of some acoustic recordings of leopard seals. So these are leopard seal calls operating under the ice. So the leopard seals are out there foraging all through the year. And this is just a really nice example. It sounds a little bit like birds singing in the trees, but you have to remember that these are actually seals hunting under the ice in the middle of the winter.
We've certainly seen a lot of water there for a drought forum, and that's been absolutely spectacular. I think that graph showing all the colours of what was going on. And wow, we're getting some questions. Put them please in the Q&A box. I've got one from this end. You were talking about, you know, don't get wowed by technology. Is that a really good thing to always keep in mind? Technology might not always be your saviour. Always apply a critical approach to a new shiny thing. What is this actually useful, and what will it do for us? And is it applicable to the challenge we're facing? Is that really a good thing to hold on to?
Yeah, I certainly. I think I've certainly seen a lot of you know, fancy technology wheeled out at times that promises to solve all of my problems, and sometimes you find it actually causing problems. And one of the principal issues is really dependencies on other systems. So you know, if this new technology is very dependent on a reliable connection to the internet, and your internet connection isn't that reliable, then it's really going to be it's going to be wonderful as long as it's working. But when the internet connection goes out, then you're going to be a bit disappointed with the results. So you've really got to think. I think it's really important when working in remote areas to have resilient systems that are quite that can operate independently. You know, if it is able to use an internet connection, that's great when it's available. But if the internet goes out, then, you know, those systems have to be able to operate reliably by themselves until such time as those services come back again. And it goes to power as well. You know, if you're dependent on power, which is a little bit unreliable, then you know, you really sort of want to think about having autonomous power systems that, you know, that are resilient, and you're not dependent on the grid, basically.
There's all kinds of resiliences, aren't there? We've got some questions coming in now for you, Lloyd. How about the approach to collaboration and co-design with, say, people from other countries? Obviously, Antarctica is split up between various nations. I mean, how do you go about that collaborative process? And is there an application, say, for other countries that face regular droughts, perhaps?
Well, certainly collaboration is an extremely important principle, and you know, that's not just international collaboration, but it's certainly collaboration within Australia as well. So, you know, if we want to put up a weather station in the Antarctic, well, we could go and do that, and but you know, we've also got a Bureau of Meteorology who are pretty good at putting up weather stations as well. So, you know, so we're very into sort of, instead of launching into, if we're asked to monitor weather in a remote location, our approach is not to, you know, start building a weather station. Our approach is to sort of cast around and look at who else has got that kind of expertise. And there are lots of similar areas. We're really getting into seabed mapping at the moment, and you know, there are other agencies such as Geoscience Australia who have got a lot of that expertise. So it's really important to not try and do everything yourself, or not try and reinvent the wheel. There's lots of other people out there who can do that. That's true in the international space as well. I don't have any particular expertise in dealing with drought, so I don't think I'm really able to comment on that, but certainly looking to partner with international people. We're talking to NASA at the moment about some of the, it's surprising, NASA are really Jet Propulsion Laboratory are really quite into undersea exploration, surprisingly enough, because that's one of the things that they hope to be doing on the moons of Saturn in the coming decades. So we're talking about some interesting collaboration. So it's at the moment with them, which is not quite what I would have expected to be doing in Antarctica. So it does go to show that sometimes you can find opportunities for collaboration in unusual places.
That's really interesting. We've been under the ocean and we've been up in space with NASA. Right, a question from Chad Renando, who's asking, and this is about, I guess, the mindset and the application of innovation and putting everything together. How many iterations did it take to get to this point? What did the minimum viable product, that's Chad's words, what did the minimum viable product look like for that Daley thing that you launched from that marvellous vessel that you have in the Antarctic division? So how many iterations did it take to get here, and what did the minimum viable product look like for that particular piece of hardware?
So we put a couple of years into the development of the base unit, and that's the electronics and the mooring and the whole sort of setup that you saw in the presentation. But really, it turned out that wasn't the great challenge. So certainly, putting together electronics, putting together all the mechanical systems, figuring out how to deploy it from the ship was probably not in the end the greatest challenge for us. And really, we got from zero to a working prototype within a couple of years. But the great challenge with that project turned out to be the ice, which was so the very first whale recorder that was deployed was actually deployed in a location that turned out to be not the best location. It was located in an area of about 2,000 metres of water, fairly far south. And in that particular year, when we looked at the ice conditions, it seemed like a pretty good place to drop it. So they dropped the mooring down, went back the next year, couldn't get it because there was too much ice. Went back the next year, couldn't get it because there was too much ice. And then, in fact, it took us 4 or 5 years before we went back. And just opportunistically, there was a hole that formed in the ice when the ship was there, and we were able to bring up the mooring after 4 or 5 years. So really, it wasn't the technological development that was the great challenge there. What we learned was we have to be really careful about where we deploy it. And so it's a total system sort of consideration. It's not just the design of the equipment, it's how you use it as well. So you've really got to be thinking about a whole sort of cycle. It's not just the design, the build, also, and it's not even the deployment. Because as we like to say with marine science, anybody can deploy something off a ship. It's actually getting it back on the ship is the challenge. And it was the getting it back on the ship that actually tripped us up with that initial one. And we solved that problem by simply never going back to that location again. But it does go to show that you've really got to consider the whole sort of life cycle of what you're doing.
That's a great answer, segueing into our final question, which has come from Pamela Greet. And when you are asking questions, if you can add where you're sitting or standing or in front of your computer and what organisation you may be representing, that'll be lovely. Pamela asks, where do you put the balance between the right question and finding the right tool or the right answer? So I guess it comes all the way back. We loop back to the mindset of innovating. How do you do that?
So, I mean, in this case, the question was a noble one, which is, can we monitor, can we monitor whales in the Southern Ocean? But there are lots of noble questions that you could be addressing, and if we addressed every noble question that came through our door, we'd be pretty busy and somewhat overwhelmed. So in this case, we came up with a solution, I guess, in this case, that made it easier for the organisation to undertake this activity. If this activity had ended up requiring many ship days of time and dedicated voyages in order to deploy these whale moorings, then we would never have got off the ground, because you're obviously constrained by your budget and the number of days that you've actually physically got to work in the Antarctic every season are limited. So For us, really, the important thing was, well, okay, here's a good question that we can address. Problem is, can we afford to address it? Have we actually got the engineering time? Have we got the budget? And those are fairly easy questions to either you have or you haven't. But the other thing is, are you going to have the opportunity to actually deploy this? And can you make it something that's not going to have too much impact? Like it's no good sort of building some sort of cheap, inexpensive, very effective device if it's going to cost you a fortune to deploy and maintain it. I think the key to success in this particular example was that we put a lot of engineering into making it simple, into making it simple to use, so that it doesn't have too much of an impact on our program. So our program's not, when we design our Antarctic season, it's not designed around these moorings. These moorings are just sort of incidental things that we can do while we're on the way to going and doing something else. I think that's really important, to find your place in the scheme of things and realise that maybe what you're doing, it's important, but sometimes you just can't take up too much oxygen, I guess.
Lloyd, thank you so much from Hobart, and thank you for your patience both there and with our audience. We got there, and Lloyd's last remarks remind me of the great Goon Show line, "I've invented a machine that does the work of 3 people, but it takes 5 people to operate it." Thanks, Lloyd. We're going from Tasmania now across the Nullarbor to Merredin, our WA hub, which is not in lockdown at the moment, which is very fortunate because Dr Grahman Bonnett is there. Hopefully without the echo, if we can sort that out. He's the interim leader of Drought Resilience Mission at CSIRO, and its goal is to identify ways of reducing the impact of drought on agriculture, communities and the environment. Now, Graham, I think, is usually on the other side of the country in Queensland, but happenstance has brought him to WA, and it has got him to Merredin, for which we are extremely grateful. Graham's going to talk to us now, and we will have another Q&A session at the end of his presentation. But now let's travel about 5,000 k's, I think, that away to WA. Graham.
Hello, good morning. Hope you can hear me. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today about. Okay, thanks for the opportunity to talk about the Drought Resilience Mission today and the engagements that we've and interactions that we've had along the way with various stakeholders and collaborators. The work of the mission and its design is not yet complete, and I'll end on some suggested ways that we can engage and work with the hubs to help them reach their objectives. But of course, look forward to discussing the hub's ideas with them as well. So the Drought Resilience Mission, as was said, is looking at reducing the impacts of Australia's droughts, and we've got a focus of trying to do that to make some impacts within this decade. So we're looking at doing this in 3 main ways. One is assisting on-farm innovation to help those on the land, looking at regional resilience, and our third area is helping support policy that is, as you've heard earlier today, trying to help the industry become more resilient and self-reliant prior to and recovering from droughts, rather than the emphasis being on in-drought support. So I'll just talk a little bit about how we've started to work in each of these areas and how we've designed some of that work with partners. So I'll start with the on-farm innovation. One of the key things we're trying to do is to work out how we can try and help people in agriculture improve their risk sharing. So we're trying to increase the use of various risk sharing strategies. Some of the more familiar ones are insurance, but there's also potential for designing other ways as well. So we're particularly trying to understand how our information tools and data can help people understand that. So we've done some engagements where we've developed an understanding of the variability in yields in various parts of the country, and tried to work through with people various scenarios in when they would be beneficial to them to have some kind of insurance in that process, and that's what the tool at the top there is showing. So we've engaged with growers and small and large companies, and one of the things that's coming out of that is that certain sectors of the agricultural community, as they're expanding or they're taking on more loans, might be more it might be more beneficial for them to engage in some of these risk sharing strategies. But we'll talk more about that as we've do the work. There is a map there of which Merredin is on, and that's a map of Western Australians' government's weather stations. One of the barriers to some of the new insurance techniques or policies around index-based insurance rely on having good weather data. And there's not good weather data for every location. So Western Australia and other organisations have put out their own weather stations. So we're working on a project that's being led by the Bureau of Meteorology using our data analysts to work out how we can validate these third-party weather station networks so that they can be used by insurance companies and others to validate insurance policies. So that's one area that we're working on currently. We've also been working with MLA on what's called a sprint activity, where we've tried to test various ideas about matching livestock numbers to feed. One of the key issues as livestock producers go into drought is matching that number of mouths to the available feed. The sprint activity was done over a few weeks, and it's rapidly iterating through some formal assessments. So there was a team from MLA and a team from CSIRO involved. We have many stakeholder interviews, and the upshot of all this was that in this particular case, this co-design process actually helped us to determine what not to do. There's partial solutions to this out there. Many of the larger organisations have their own strategies and didn't think there was much benefit in having a single solution because they would lose some of their competitive advantage. So as I say, in this particular case, we went through this process of testing an idea. We couldn't see a way of making it work at the present time, so that moved us on to something else. So in this area, what we are doing is having a look at one of the inputs to that destocking decision. During our processes of investigation, and this won't be a surprise to many people, is that there's many inputs to the decision about destocking. Several reasons why people are reluctant to restock early, and one of those is that they're anxious that they might lose some of their genetics that they've built up over many years. So what we've decided to do here is to go through an exploratory modelling exercise to see if we can come up with a different way of going about that destocking decision. Traditionally, that might be done when people have to make that decision through taking their oldest animals and trying to get rid of those first. We're trying to see if there's a way of using genetic information that may be collected for other purposes to actually use that as a basis of determining which animals to destock with. And the second aspect of that is then to compare individuals' herd genetics with the breed genetics and see if we can come up with some strategies that will actually help people use this information to inform that often emotional decision about destocking. Just the last one in the on-farm area is we have many in CSIRO, our Research and Development Corporation funded projects with partners, but we've also been working with the Cross RDC Climate Initiative to come up with some whole of sector approaches to managing the climate variability that's before us. This process utilised design-led thinking, and there was a lot of engagement and co-creation around that process. And Matt Barwick from Fisheries RDC will present the details of this process later on in the meeting, so I won't say more about that. Just a couple of slides on how we're approaching regional resilience. One of the ways that regional towns are going to be affected through drought is their town water supplies. We saw this in the recent drought in New South Wales and southern Queensland in the last drought, where towns approached day zero and some in fact did run out of water. One of the approaches we're looking at to see is whether water banking, which is taking water and storing it underground in aquifers, can be used to increase town water security. We've identified the opportunity in the Murray-Darling Basin. That's shown here in these green areas on the map. And we've used this first cut map to engage with local councils, regional organisations, and the New South Wales Special Activation Precincts. And we're working towards a demonstration site now to see if we can actually get this underway and get the policy setting right in New South Wales to test this approach and hopefully then use that in many places to increase town water security. As well as water, there's the economic effects of drought on communities. And so we've been working with communities and grower groups, such as the Grain Growers Alliance here in Merredin, and Birchip and FarmLink in New South Wales, to come up with an approach to undertake some transition planning so that we can help communities work out ways in which they can face the future through either adapting what they're doing or looking for transformational pathways for themselves. And so this is something they're now trying to work with the states and the Future Drought Fund program around community resilience to see if we can enact some of that. Just a couple of slides on some things we're doing in the policy enabler areas. We've been working with the National Response and Recovery Agency on developing the National Drought Map, seeking to help them develop indicators of drought so that when assistance is required, it can be targeted to those in need, and been working with them on some feed availability assessments so that they can help monitor the situation. So we're working closely with them, and obviously as the new agency gets up and running, we'll be looking forward to more conversations with them. The second area, as was mentioned earlier, is the Climate Services for Agriculture component of the Future Drought Fund. This prototype I'll talk about later on in the week. We can give you some details on that. But this Climate Services for Agriculture prototype that will be released soon takes historical and future-looking climate information and puts it in the same place. And at a 5-kilometre resolution, it's going to be allowing people across the country to look at what has happened in the past and ask questions about, has my climate been changing? How have I adapted to that? And what do I need to do and think about for the future? But more about that tomorrow. One of the key things, as was mentioned earlier, that this prototype will be used for is to go and engage in our pilot regions and with the hubs and others to get useful feedback and co-design what other features need to go into this platform as we develop it further. So just to end up with some examples of how we hope we might be able to work with hubs. We're developing a discussion document, and I'll leave a copy of that here in Merredin this afternoon and get some feedback on that. And then hopefully talk to all the hubs about that. But obviously we're keen to understand from hubs how they might like to interact with us as well. We have a diverse capability and a national footprint, and some of the ideas I'll show you here are beyond the areas that you might normally think about. So the first example, one of the roles that the hubs have is in trying to encourage commercialisation, and we have a team within CSIRO that can assist small to medium-sized enterprises with their commercialisation. And there's a variety of programs, including this Innovate to Grow, where there's a process of getting small companies working with researchers in the first instance to understand how research and development might be useful to forward the aims and aspirations of their companies. And then there's a couple of other schemes that this team can help small companies with to kickstart some of that engagement with R&D. Another thing that we've just been working on that might be of interest to various hubs is some dust modelling we've done. We've taken our capability in atmospheric particulate modelling and tried to see if we can actually hindcast dust lost and turn that into what might have happened is a loss of soil. And so we've done that for the last 15 years, and these models run on inputs of ground cover and meteorological data. And you can see there that in the year 2010 to 11, there was a lot less dust lost across the country, in particular in New South Wales and southern Queensland, compared to a very dry year like last year, where that's different. So this is operating at a sort of 10-kilometre grid. So it'd be interesting to work with hubs to get down into some of the details of this to try and help inform where some areas might benefit from having a closer look to see if we can try and help people reduce some of that loss. We've also been working with growers in the regions before we start doing some work in particular areas. One of these is a drought irrigation innovation study. We're trying to gain a better understanding of how water users across different regions and sectors have coped in times of drought, and from that identify things that might have cross-sectional benefits and guide future research. So we are interested in engaging with a diverse range of irrigators, and if any of the hubs have irrigators that might be interested, we'd encourage people to contact Rose Roche, whose details are there. So just in summary, we look forward to discussing engagements and further co-design with the hubs. Some of the features of the things that we've been doing to date that have led to success are a high level of external engagement, co-creation of materials, and development of some prototypes and artifacts to help engage further with partners. And we look forward to having further conversations around that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham. We've got some questions coming in. Don't forget you can use the Q&A box for those questions. I've got a question, actually. The R&D world is very different to the day-to-day world of primary industries, farming and small businesses in rural areas. Is one of the challenges for you trying to put those together, the dovetail, because they are not in conflict so much, but they are different universes on a human scale.
They are different, but unless we bring them together, then we stand a high chance of developing things that will never get adopted. So I think you've probably seen over the last at least 10, 15 years, very much an increased engagement between researchers and those who are targeted as being the end users of that research, and many more iterations as the original ideas are developed, and lot of engagement along the way. And in the case of agriculture, of course, you've got the ability to trial it with consultants and growers and producers along the way. So I think they're different, and you start from a different place, but unless you come together, then you end up with something that nobody wants.
An old convergence things. Thanks, Graham. Pamela Greek from Brisbane has asked a question for you regarding the sprint activity with the MLA. What is the definition of feed? Does that include projections of grass in the ground, or how do they define an aggregate feed? Can you answer that one?
Yeah, so just say a little bit more about the idea. Individuals are matching the feed they have, which is grass growing and the grass predicted to grow, or other forms of feed if it's not grass, like shrubs or cereals. And so people look at that on an individual basis, but what if you could look at it on a broader basis and understood what was available in the region, or even in some cases across the nation, and could we conceive of ideas of better matching where animals are to where feed is? So for the purpose of that discussion and that exploration, we were considering the feed available in the ground, but also thinking how far you can take projections of that feed for over the next few months, and obviously stored feed through hay and silage and other things is also an important part of that equation.
Our hubs are beginning to ask questions, and despite the COVID issues around the place, we have got groups of people suitably socially distanced asking questions, and this one's come in from the Southern Queensland, Northern New South Wales hub asking, how does that particular hub, and I guess other hubs as well, connect with the CSIRO to start the kind of conversations you want to have?
We'll give you a call, but in the case of that particular hub, I hope one of my colleagues is meeting with Roger Stone very soon about something else, and we'll start that in engagement. We've actually nominated individuals within our organisation to lead those engagements with particular hubs, so if they haven't made contact with you, they will soon.
Who are you going to call? You're going to call the mission's going to call you. We've got another question here. This is from Anonymous. Not quite sure where Anonymous is, but anyway. What has the mission shown are the biggest barriers and the biggest opportunities to building resilience at the farm level? So where are the biggest barriers and also the biggest opportunities down on the farm?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be the case where this answer is going to be disappointing, because I think we find when we're dealing with systems that we're not looking for silver bullets. We're looking for several things to put together to try and help those solutions. So many things combined together can help improve productivity with the water that we have got. So I think it's important we also talk about sort of low rainfall years rather than, you know, the extremes that we might think of drought as well, and things that are going to work well in low rainfall yields will be good. So there's lots of sort of practices on farm, but I think some of the things that are not necessarily about agronomy, but about the way the business operates and some of these risk sharing ideas. There's a lot of attraction in those, but we haven't really been able to nail the presentation and the discussion of those quite right yet. And I think that's something that we're working on there. So I think it's going to be a combination of improving the practices on the ground, thinking about diversification and other ways in which we manage risk, and then putting several things together to help individuals for their situation.
Dr Grahman Bonnett from the CSIRO, interim leader of the Drought Resilience Mission. Thank you so much, and safe travels. Fingers crossed for when you cross the continent again. It's 13 degrees in Merredin in WA and cloudy. It's also cloudy in Canberra, but you win. We've only got 10 degrees here. Have a lovely rest of the day. We'll be visiting that hub during our 3-day FDF Science to Practice Forum. Well, we're almost at lunchtime. We have had other questions about the forum. One from Tracy Watson: are these sessions being recorded and will they be available to view after the event? Yes, they will. After the forum is finished, it will go online at the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. Can't give you a specific date, but it'll be in the next week or so. And don't forget all your input in the comments section. I think the quote in the room was, "It's going off." All that information, all those comments are collected and the department looks at it. So there's more than one way of skinning a cat in terms of this forum. We hear from people, questions are asked, you comment, you ask questions, you're in your hubs. I know in Hobart, after Lloyd finished his presentation to the whole of the country, Hobart had their own chat in Tasmania about what he was speaking to. And I think one thing that linked both Graham and Lloyd's presentations was you want the best outcome, not necessarily the best shiny object. And I think that's it's all being matter of fact and being very practical. Well, to be practical, we are now going to have a break for sustenance, for food and drink. It's almost lunchtime in the east. It's brunch time in the central and western time zones. We'll be back in about an hour's time. You've heard a lot about the hubs and what they get up to. We're actually going to visit 3 of the hubs in all along the east coast. Our first 3 in tropical North Queensland, in southern Queensland and northern New South Wales, and the one closest to us here in Canberra, which is the southern New South Wales hub, which is in Wagga, which is sort of kind of part of what we like to call the capital region. You're watching the Future Drought Fund Science to Practice Forum being presented from Canberra and linking the entire country. I'm Andrew Bell. I'm your host for today and the next 2 days, and I'll be back in around about 60 minutes. Have a good lunch or brunch.